The General Overseas Service of All India Radio presents readings from an autobiography or the story of my experiments with truth. The reading from the autobiography is presented by Sri Gopalkrishna Gandhi, writer, teacher, and the youngest grandson of Kasturba Gandhi and Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. The words of the Mahatma in the voice of his grandson.
The trial began. The government pleader, the magistrate, and other officials were at a loss to know what to do. The government pleader was pressing the magistrate to postpone the case. But I interfered and requested the magistrate not to postpone the case, as I wanted to plead guilty to having disobeyed the order to leave Champaran, and read a brief statement as follows. I venture to make this statement, not in any way in extenuation of the penalty to be awarded against me, but to show that I have disregarded the orders served upon me, not for want of respect for lawful authority, but in obedience to the higher law of our being, the voice of conscience. Before I could appear before the court to receive the sentence, the magistrate sent a written message that the Lieutenant Governor had ordered the case against me to be withdrawn. And the collector wrote to me saying I was at liberty to conduct the proposed inquiry and that I might count on whatever help I needed from officials. None of us was prepared for this prompt and happy issue. The country thus had its first direct object lesson in civil disobedience. The affair was freely discussed both locally and in the press. I pointed out it was open to government to terminate my inquiry by accepting the riots' grievance as genuine and redressing them, or by recognizing that the riots had made out a prima facie case for an official inquiry, which should be immediately instituted. Sir Edward Gate, the Lieutenant Governor, asked me to see him, expressed his willingness to appoint an inquiry, and invited me to be a member of the committee. The committee found in favor of the riots. The Tinkatia system, which had been in existence for about a century, was thus abolished, and with it the planters' Raj came to an end. At the same time, there came a letter from Srimati Anasuyabai about the condition of labour in Ahmedabad. Wages were low. The labourers had long been agitating for an increment, and I had a desire to guide them, if I could. The mill hands' case was strong. Srimati Anasuyabai had to battle against her own brother, Shrijut Ambalal Sarabhai, who led the fray on behalf of the mill owners. My relations with them were friendly, and that made fighting with them the more difficult. I held consultations with them and requested them to refer the dispute to arbitration, but they refused to recognize the principle of arbitration. I had therefore to advise the labourers to go on strike. But before I did so, I came in very close contact with them and their leaders and explained to them the conditions of a successful strike. 1. Never to resort to violence. 2. Never to molest blacklegs. 3. Never to depend upon arms. And 4. To remain firm, no matter how long the strike continued, and to earn bread during the strike by any other honest labour. The leaders of the strike understood and accepted the conditions. It was during this strike that I came to know intimately Shrijut Vallabhbhai Patel. The strike went on for 21 days. During the continuance of the strike, I consulted the mill owners from time to time and treated them to do justice to the labourers. For the first 2 weeks, the mill hands exhibited great courage and self-restraint and daily held monster meetings. On these occasions, I used to remind them of their pledge, and they would shout back to me the assurance that they would rather die than break their word. But at last, they began to show signs of flagging. One morning, it was at a mill hands meeting, while I was still groping and unable to see my way clearly, the light came to me. Unbidden and all by themselves, the word came to my lips. Unless the strikers rally, I declared to the meeting, and continue the strike till a settlement is reached, or till they leave the mills altogether, I will not touch any food. In the meantime, Vallabhbhai was trying to find some employment for the strikers under the municipality, but there was not much hope of success there. The hearts of the mill owners were touched, and they set about discovering some means for a settlement. Shrijut Anand Shankar Dhruva intervened and was in the end appointed arbitrator, and the strike was called off after I had fasted only for 3 days. The mill owners commemorated the event by distributing sweets among the labourers, and thus a settlement was reached after 21 days' strike. Hardly was the Ahmedabad mill's hand strike over when I had to plunge into the Kheda Satyagraha struggle. The cultivators' demand was as clear as daylight, and so moderate as to make out a strong case for its acceptance. A condition approaching famine had arisen in the Kheda district owing to a widespread failure of crops, and the patidars of Kheda were considering the question of getting the revenue assessment for the year suspended. Under the land revenue rules, if the crop was 4 annas or under, the cultivators could claim full suspension of the revenue assessment for the year. According to the official figures, the crop was said to be over 4 annas. The contention of the cultivators, on the other hand, was that it was less than 4 annas, but the government was in no mood to listen. I advised the patidars to resort to satyagraha. My principal comrades in this struggle were Shrijut Vallabhbhai Patel, Shankarlal Banker, Srimati Anusuya Ben, Shrijut Indulal Yagnik, Mahadev Desai, and others. Shrijut Vallabhbhai, in joining the struggle, had to suspend a splendid and growing practice at the bar, which to all practical purposes he was never able to resume. The campaign came to an unexpected end. It was clear that the people were exhausted, and I hesitated to let the unbending be driven to utter ruin. I was casting about for some graceful way which would be acceptable to a satyagrahi. Such a one appeared quite unexpectedly. The Mamlatdar of the Nadiad Taluka sent me word that if well-to-do patidars paid up, the poorer ones would be granted suspension. I asked for a written undertaking to that effect, which was given. However, the end was far from making me feel happy, inasmuch as it lacked the grace with which the termination of every satyagraha campaign ought to be accompanied. The Kheda campaign was launched while the deadly war in Europe was still going on. Now a crisis had arrived, and the Viceroy had invited various leaders to a war conference in Delhi. In response to the invitation, I went to Delhi. I had, however, objections to taking part in the conference, the principal one being the exclusion from it of leaders like the Ali brothers. I was eager to understand the Mussalman mind through contact with their purest and most patriotic representatives. I therefore never needed any pressure to go with them wherever they took me in order to get into intimate touch with them. I had realized early enough in South Africa that there was no genuine friendship between the Hindus and the Mussalmans. I never missed a single opportunity to remove obstacles in the way of unity. It was not in my nature to placate anyone by adulation or at the cost of self-respect. But my South African experiences had convinced me that it would be on the question of Hindu-Muslim unity that my ahimsa would be put to its severest test, and that the question presented the widest field for my experiments in ahimsa. The conviction is still there. Every moment of my life I realize that God is putting me on my trial. I happened casually to read in the papers the Rowlatt Committee's recommendations, and these startled me. Shankarlal Banker and Umar Sobhani approached me with the suggestions that I should take some prompt action in the matter. In about a month, I went to Ahmedabad. I mentioned my apprehensions to Vallabhbhai, who used to come and see me almost daily. Something must be done, said I to him. But what can we do in the circumstances? He asked in reply. I answered, if even a handful of men can be found to sign the pledge of resistance, and the proposed measure is passed into law in defiance of it, we ought to offer satyagraha at once. A separate body called the Satyagraha Sabha was established at my instance. I became the president of the Satyagraha Sabha. Thus, while on the one hand the agitation against the Rowlatt Committee's report gathered volume and intensity, on the other, the government grew more and more determined to give effect to its recommendations, and the Rowlatt Bill was published.
You just heard the reading from the Autobiography of Mahatma Gandhi, presented by Sri Gopalkrishna Gandhi, the youngest grandson of Kasturba Gandhi and Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi.